Well, you did the moment of reflection there. Did that change the way you led your life from there?
Well, I'd always been, from an early age, I won't really go into that, but from an early age at school, I had an extraordinary experience of God. I had a really vivid moment. As a 9-year-old, I got very puzzled about God, and I got very puzzled about the relevance of church, because we were in a choir and at a little school in Bude, prep school, and we used to, our school provided the choir, so we were all robed up with these frilly white collars and everything. I thought it was all a bit of a daft thing, but you may want to edit this out, but I had a very great naughty streak, which I haven't really lost, but I vividly remember I'd torn out a page from the hymn book, and I was chewing it up into a pellet, and I had a straw, and I was about to fire it down the straw into the neck of the choir boy in front of me to kind of liven things up a bit. And then I looked up, and right opposite me on the wall was the crucifix. And I had one of those very seminal moments when I thought, what I am doing is definitely inappropriate and offensive. But the thought that, I was fairly chastened by that thought, but the thought that immediately followed was, yes, and everything that's going on in this church. It was a real pantomime. I don't want to offend people, but it was all bells and whistles and smoke and incense and it just mumbo jumbo. And I thought everything else in this church is also an offence to God. It's nothing to. So I cried out in my little 9-year-old naivety, saying, God, if you're real, please show me somehow. That night, I had an extraordinary vision. In my naughtiness, I had discovered a way, it was a boarding school, I discovered a way of climbing out of the dormitory window and shinning down the drain pipe. And I used to do this. And I went out onto the playing fields in my pyjamas. Well, this night, I dreamt that I was doing that. And it was incredibly real. I thought, that's it, I'm out there on the games field. And then I looked up and I saw, hey, that's strange. There's 2 moons tonight, sort of one over there and one over there. And as I looked at the right-hand moon, I thought, no, that's not the moon. It's a circle of light, and it's got a little black dot in the middle of it. And this thing came rapidly closer, and the dot took the shape of a man. Eventually, it was standing about 30 feet away in front of me, just up in the sky, about 10 feet up. And it was Jesus, exactly like I'd seen him in the picture books, in the picture Bible. And he just smiled at me, and he gently beckoned in a lovely sort of winsome way that made me feel completely that, yes, he is real. And more than that, he cares about me. So it was a very, it coloured my life, because I always thought that Jesus was personally interested, and it made a difference. Very much so. Later on, it made it possible to take God seriously. Well, perhaps we should go on. After this flying, when I came back to England, I then had to go on to the British side of the RAF in England. Just had a bit of a jaundiced view about the value of the training in Canada, because the Canadians enjoyed wonderful weather on the whole. I was caught out in a blizzard once. That was pretty exciting, and anyway, and I managed to grope my way back to the airfield in a blizzard. But the RAF insisted that you did some flying in English weather, and so we were at Worksop, which is near Nottingham, through an English winter with typical terrible weather and rain and everything. And well, I don't know if you want me to tell you of my near-death experience, but we were on these horrible little airplanes called Vampires. Some people think they were fun, but pretty primitive. And one day I was up flying. There was an instructor flying another airplane, and he arranged for me to fly up beside him in this single-seat airplane. And I was flying through this thick cloud, like 40,000 feet of cloud, all the way up from 1,000 feet to 41,000. And so we struggled up through the cloud. It's like driving in fog.
Okay.
You can just see the car in front. I could just see, I couldn't see all of the aeroplane I was flying close to. I could just see his right wing, and I was on his right-hand side. And eventually we broke out on the top, and after chasing around a bit and through the tops of the clouds, he said, when I say brake right, go, break away from me and return on your own. Well, he very foolishly, and he had sort of admitted it sheepishly afterwards, what I assumed, when you're flying, especially sort of in and out of cloud, and you're glued to another airplane, you literally hardly know whether you're upside down or what. You're just glued to his wingtip, and you see that. And so I assumed that when he said brake right, he was flying level, but he wasn't. And when I broke right, I just made sure that I was parting away from him. And when I saw I was parting away, I looked into my cockpit, ready to take over on my own instruments. And to my horror, my instruments had what's called toppled. In those days, they were primitive. If you went more than 90 degrees of bank, the instrument needed several minutes to recover of level flight. Well, the silly man, he was already flying at about 60 degrees of bank. I didn't know that when I turned away from him. So I went straight up past the 90 degree, and I was away from him. But then I thought, horror! My instruments all going bananas, and I hadn't been trained for that, and I went through about 2 or 3 minutes of complete mayhem with the airspeed going wow up 500 and altitude going 40,000, 30,000, 20,000, and I just didn't know. I was so lucky I didn't just burst out of the cloud and hit the ground, but I did eventually burst out of the cloud, and I saw straight beneath me an army parade square in the rain with a group of soldiers on it marching, and I thought to myself, that's where I'm going to go, and what are they going to think happened to me? And I did the instinctive thing. I pulled back so hard on the stick, and I blacked out. I lost consciousness. And I must have terrified those soldiers, because somehow it zoomed down. And when you go unconscious through excessive G...
How many G would that be pulling through?
About 6 or something like that, actually. And I relaxed the controls. So I went, and then as I relaxed the controls, a little bit of vision came back in the middle, and I saw myself hurtling upwards into the cloud. So I'd missed the ground by God's good grace, and then I knew which way was up. And I was able to sort myself out and shakily make my way back to base,
This is fascinating because I had a conversation with my dad, who was in the RAF.
Yes.
But not as a pilot, just as his description, like a clerk, a desk clerk. But he used to go up with the trainers, and he'd be in the back with people on their wingtips, and he describes this as meteors, I think.
Meteor,
And he still talks about it to this day. It was one of his sort of greatest things. He said, but the trainer had the responsibility of these two either side, and it's a vivid memory for him. I think the speed, I think the excitement, and the fact that he doesn't know what's going on. He's literally the passenger. So that's resonating with me a lot, and hearing your story. But what links those things is your faith, isn't it? From the Silver Arrow to the Silver Star. The Silver Star.
Silver Star.
Your faith, your being a 9-year-old kid, there's that, and has your faith served you well?
Well, what happened, it's partly that I didn't enjoy dashing around the sky like some of my friends did in single-engine jets. I mean, they tended to breed a rather brash, irresponsible sort of harum-scarum lifestyle, and although I'm pretty mischievous, that didn't appeal to me. And when I finished flying these Vampires, there was an opportunity suddenly opened up to go on to heavy transport aeroplanes. They were just bringing in this new, biggest aeroplane the Air Force ever had. I think it probably was the biggest wingspan. It was bigger than a jumbo jet.
They seem to defy logic, but physics takes over, doesn't it?
I thought I want a big crew. I want to have a crew and a big aircraft
and a floor.
And a floor, and always know which way's up. because you don't loop the loop in the transport. Anyway, so I was very happy with that, and I got on to this transport force. It was an airplane called a Beverley, because it was made in Beverley up in Yorkshire.
Yep. I know Beverley.
That's a picture of it. I mean, you see the dwarf people beside it. It was just huge. It's like flying a house from the upstairs window. Yeah. It really was.
I'm just to let you know if you can't see it, I'm looking at the picture now, and it literally is. It's a house. It's a great big house with some wings attached and a tail.
Well, while I was doing that, I was doing it as a co-pilot, of course, at first, but that was good.
Which you didn't enjoy, I gather.
Well, I did, you know, for a bit. You're quite right, but you have to, I mean, if you go into British Airways, you'll be a co-pilot for maybe 20 years. Well, after a couple of years, and pretty exciting, we did all sorts of flying, terrible weather, and out in Aden, we used to go out on detachments to Aden and flying up country where you got, I think I mentioned in my notes that you occasionally, the ground crew said, did you know you had some bullet holes in the way? Because you're flying over hostile villages and they would shoot off rifles. I mean, and none of us ever got hurt, but it was just sort of amusing. And anyway, after doing this as a co-pilot, and I was very blessed to have a captain, I teamed up with a captain who was most unusual in that he trusted me. Most of the co-pilots were treated rather, sort of put them down. Yeah. Even though they were responsible, you had to do all the load, you had to do all the weight and balance to make sure the aircraft was in back. You had to do the refueling, manage the engines, which were quite complicated to keep them running smoothly. It was a satisfying job. But after a couple of years of this, and especially this captain used to say, it's your leg this time. He would share about. And I remember one leg, we were going from Abingdon in England to Malta. Yeah. And as it happened, we were going into Malta at about 11 o'clock at night. It was pitch dark, of course. And there was the most horrendous thunderstorm. It was just bucketing rain and flashing lightning, and the turbulence was something horrendous. And I was like that film Airplane with the pilot with the sweat running. I was heaving this, and I was in the captain's seat.
That's not an easy land, Malta, either, is it?
And it wasn't in those days. It was quite a short runway. And I said, "Are you sure you don't want to do this?" No, he said, "It's good training." And boy, I was wrestling this thing down at night onto the runway, and it was so violently windy. I was still fighting the control. He said, "Relax, Tim, we're on the ground." I hadn't noticed that we'd actually touched down on the runway. And so, but that was exceptional to have a captain who would let you do that sort of thing. Yeah.